Proof 016, Donny Most. Actor Donny Most played a character named Ralph Malph on the TV show Happy Days. After Happy Days went off the air, Donny Most provided the voice for the Cavalier character on the Saturday morning cartoon Dungeons and Dragons. Among Donny's Happy Days co-stars were Jack Dodson. He played Donny's father, an eye doctor named Dr. Mickey Mouth. Ron Howard played Donny's friend, Richie Cunningham. And Tom Bosley played Richie Cunningham's father, Mr. C. Happy Days was not the first TV series that Ron Howard and Jack Dodson had been on together. Both had also appeared as regulars on the TV series The Andy Griffith Show. On that show, Ron Howard played Opie Taylor, son of Sheriff Andy Taylor, and Jack Dodson played the county clerk, Howard Sprague. On the TV show Happy Days, Donnie and Ron's characters, Ralph and Richie, spent a lot of time hanging out at a drive-in restaurant called Arnold's. The TV show Happy Days was based on a segment from the television show Love American Style. I believe the episode was called Love in the Television. I know the Love American Style episode had Marion Ross, who played the mother. It had Ron Howard in it. It had Anson Williams, who played Richie's friend Potsy on Happy Days. Now later, when George Lucas was casting for his film American Graffiti, he saw Ron Howard in the Love American Style episode and wanted to cast him in one of the roles in American Graffiti. Now, as it would turn out, the popularity of the movie American Graffiti was what inspired Gary Marshall to go back and look at the Love American Style episode and consider it as a series. And so it was the Love American Style episode that inspired George Lucas to cast Ron Howard in American Graffiti, and it was the success of American Graffiti which inspired Gary Marshall to turn the Love American Style episode into a television series called Happy Days, and so they all kind of connect together. Happy Days premiered in September of 1974. 2 months later, in November of 1974, my fifth grade class went on a field trip to the newspaper offices of Today's News. When my class returned back to school, we created our own little newspaper. One of the things I was assigned to do was create comic strips for the newspaper. So we later ended up turning in our little newspaper we made at school, and Today's News actually published our newspaper in their real newspaper. So the comic strips I drew ended up being published. So I did want to point out the close proximity in time between the field trip in which I produced these comic strips and the premiere of Happy Days, because they will both be connected by actor Donny Most. Okay, so I want to begin the analysis by examining the comic strips I had published in a November 1974 edition of Today's News. In the top panel, there were two panels, each of which represented an image of a dragon. So this would be dragon plus dragon equals dragons, and that one dragon plus one dragon equals two dragons. And so we get the plural of the word dragons from the first panel. Now move down to the third panel. The third panel was a recreation of a Wizard of Id comic strip I had recently read in the newspaper at the time. In the original comic strip, there was a guard in a dungeon informing a prisoner who I believe was chained to a wall that the king had said he was to only be given bread and water, to which the prisoner replied, "What's bread and water?" So basically, to the best of my ability, I recreated this comic strip. The only thing is that in the final panel, instead of saying, having the prisoner say, "What's bread and water?" I switched it around and had him say, "What's water and bread?" But so in the Wizard of Id strip, I drew one panel with the guard and one panel with the prisoner. Now the guard was standing inside of a dungeon, and so the guard panel represents dungeon. The prisoner was chained to a wall in a dungeon, so the prisoner represents dungeon. So from panel 3, we get dungeon plus dungeon equals dungeons, and that one dungeon plus one dungeon equals two dungeons. So from panel 1, or from strip 1, we get dragons, and from strip 3, we get dungeons, and the two of them together are dungeons and dragons. And so contained within the comic strip is a reference to Dungeons and Dragons. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons is a show featuring Donny Most. So November 1974 represents show featuring Donny Most through the analysis I just did. 2 months earlier, a show featuring Donny Most called Happy Days premiered. So September 1974 represents Happy Days, and that in turn represents a show featuring Donny Most. November 1974, 2 months later, represents Dungeons and Dragons, which was also a show which featured Donny Most. And so these two months both separate by only the month of October. Both have a connection to TV shows that Donny Most was on. Across the street from the old Today's News office is the old Rome Medical Center building. I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that in 1974 the Rome Medical Center was still called the Harriman Hospital. I'm not really sure which year the name changed. But Harriman Hospital and the Rome Medical Center were the same place. They just had different names. So regardless of what it was called in 1974, the building across the street represents Rome Medical Center for purposes of analysis. So as far as the proximity of Today's News, it was directly across the street from Rome Medical Center. The Rome Medical Center uses the initials RMC, which are anagram for Mr. C, which is the name of a character from the TV show Happy Days. So from a proximity viewpoint, we also get a reference to Happy Days, in that Today's News represents Dungeons and Dragons, represents a Donny Most show, TV show. The Rome Medical Center across the street represents Mr. C, a character from Happy Days. So from one building we get a TV show featuring Donny Most, and from the other building we get Mr. C. These are both references to Happy Days, in that Happy Days was a TV show featuring Donny Most, and Happy Days was a show that featured a character named Mr. C. So Mr. C was played by an actor named Tom Bosley. So I'm going to examine the name Tom Bosley and explain how it connects to everything. Tom Bosley can be abbreviated as T. Bosley. Break T. Bosley down to the following two letter groups, TB and OSLEY. Add the TB, T20 plus B2 is 22. Letter 22 is V, therefore TB equals V. The OSLEY is an anagram for OYLES. So TB equals V, OSLEY equals OYLES. Put the V with the OYLES to get Voiles. Voiles is my last name. So Here's how all this ties together. The the night the comic strips were drawn by a kid named Voiles. The comic strips were a reference to Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons was a television show featuring Donny Most. A television show featuring Donny Most was Happy Days. Happy Days featured a character named Mr. C. Mr. C was played by Tom Bosley. The name Tom Bosley decodes to Voiles, and Voiles is the name of the kid who drew the comic strips, which were published in today's news. The comic strips were published in the last quarter of 1974. In the last quarter of 1974, the TV show Happy Days premiered. And so that's how all of those things connect. In this next part of the analysis, I will be referencing several points from this map. At point A is the old Today's News office. I've already explained the connection to Dungeons and Dragons. Across the street from that, at point B, is the old Rome Medical Center building. At point C is the Temperance Building. At point D is the Harriman Library. At point E is the old Odds and Ends Hobby Shop building. And at point F is the Tattoos by Brian tattoo shop. So 7 years after Today's News published my comic strips, in 1981, I began playing a game called Dungeons and Dragons. The groups who played the game met at the Temperance Building, which is at location C. One of the Dungeons and Dragons players sold me his copy of the Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual book. His mother later became a librarian at the Harriman Library. So, and the Odds and Ends Hobby Shop is where they used to sell Dungeons and Dragons books, dice, modules, and other supplies. So locations A, C, D, and E can all be connected to Dungeons and Dragons in some way. So to continue the analysis of Donny Most, I need to reference one of his Happy Days co-stars, Ron Howard. Ron Howard appeared in George Lucas's film American Graffiti. George Lucas followed up American Graffiti with Star Wars. Ron Howard played Opie on the Andy Griffith Show. Opie was Sheriff Andy Taylor's son. Andy Taylor was the sheriff of Mayberry. The county clerk of Mayberry was a man named Howard Sprague. He was played by actor Jack Dodson. I once heard Ron Howard do an interview about the first time he ever gave an autograph that he was unable to completely sign his name. In an interview, Ron Howard said that when the Andy Griffith Show became really popular, he was still learning to write in cursive. And he'd done some kind of event where people from different TV shows were there signing autographs. And some kid came up and asked him for his autograph. And this was the first time he had ever been asked for an autograph. So because he was still learning cursive, he was writing his autograph very slowly. So as he was writing his autograph in cursive, the kid saw Jerry Mathers, the actor who played the Beaver on the TV show Leave It to Beaver. And apparently the kid was more excited about getting the Beaver's autograph than Opie's autograph, because the kid grabbed his autograph book from Ron Howard and took off running after Jerry Mathers to get his autograph. So the reason that Ron Howard had been unable to complete his first autograph was because of the actor who played the Beaver. And so that's going to become important. The Beaver is the name of a movie starring Mel Gibson. This is a reference to the name Mel. I'm going to put the name Mel as Exhibit A. The beaver is a creature who builds a dam for a home. Dam spelled backwards is mad, and mad is the name of a magazine, Mad Magazine. Therefore, Exhibit B will be Mad. The beaver inside the glass case at the Harriman Library is a brown beaver. This is reference to the Beaver Brown Band, who had a hit song called On the Dark Side. Across the street from the library is a tattoo shop called Tattoos by Brian. Tattoos by Brian had a phone book ad which featured an image of Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars. The connection of Obi-Wan Kenobi to On the Dark Side is Darth Vader in the movie Star Wars, in that Obi-Wan Kenobi was killed by Darth Vader, who was on the dark side of the Force. So therefore, On the Dark Side and Obi-Wan Kenobi from the tattoo shop in the Harriman Library both reference Star Wars. Star Wars was the film that George Lucas made after making American Graffiti. So what we get is On the Dark Side, Obi-Wan Kenobi equals Star Wars, and Star Wars equals a George Lucas film. So the brown beaver is a reference to a George Lucas film. This will be Exhibit C. The Beaver is the name of a film starring Mel Gibson. Rearrange the letters in the name Mel Gibson as follows: LOMIEGBSN. Some of these letter groups will go through metamorphosis, some will remain the same. The LO remains the same. MI is M13 plus I9 is 22. Letter 22 is V, therefore MI equals V. EG remains the same. BS is B2 plus S19 is 21. Letter 21 of the alphabet is U. Therefore, BS equals U. The N remains the same. So the letter group LO, MI, EG, BS, N now becomes LO, V, EG, UN. This spells Love Gun. Therefore, the Beaver equals Mel Gibson equals Love Gun. On the album Love Gun, there's a song called Christine 16. The title of this song contains the title of a movie, Christine. The movie Christine is about a teenager named Arnold Cunningham who buys a car named Christine. Now, this is the combination. These two names are important because Arnold is the name of the man who owns a drive-in restaurant called Arnold's on Happy Days. And on Happy Days, the teenager who hangs out at Arnold's is named Cunningham. His name Richie Cunningham. He's played by Ron Howard. Now, as I've already explained earlier in this video, Ron Howard has a special connection to the Beaver because of a story he told about the first time he was giving an autograph. So anyway, Christine represents Arnold Cunningham. This represents Cunningham hanging out at a drive-in restaurant called Arnold's on Happy Days. Therefore, Arnold and Cunningham represent two things. Arnold represents a drive-in restaurant, and Cunningham represents a role played by Ron Howard. So from this, we'll get two exhibits. Exhibit D and E will be drive-in restaurant and Ron Howard. Okay, so now I have 5 exhibits. Exhibit A is Mel. Exhibit B is Mad. Exhibit C is just film. Exhibit D is drive-in restaurant. Exhibit E is Ron Howard. All 5 of these exhibits are keywords associated with the movie American Graffiti. Okay, so first of all, American Graffiti is a George Lucas film starring Ron Howard. So that takes care of C and E. So that leaves Mel and Drive-In. In the movie American Graffiti, Ron Howard's character hangs out at a drive-in restaurant called Mel's. So that leaves Mad. Mad is a reference to Mad Magazine. The poster art for the movie American Graffiti was drawn by a artist from Mad Magazine. The same artist later did a satire of the movie American Graffiti as a story called American Confetti. So Mad references the artwork for the movie poster. The two locations I used in order to come up with these exhibits were the Harriman Library and the Tattoos by Brian Tattoo Shop. Across the street from both of these locations is the old Odds and Ends hobby shop where they used to sell Dungeons and Dragons supplies and books. And so the common thing that library and the tattoo shop have in common are they're both across the street from the hobby shop, while not really across the street from each other, in that they are diagonally positioned to each other. So the two locations used in creating the exhibits equal Odds and Ends, which in turn equals Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons was the name of the Saturday morning cartoon on which Donny Most provided the voice of the Cavalier. And so the Odds and Ends shop represents Donny Most. So from the Beaver, from the library, we get a reference to Ron Howard playing a character that hangs out at a drive-in restaurant. Now, Ron Howard did this in the movie American Graffiti, but he also did it on the TV show Happy Days. And when Ron Howard hung out at a drive-in restaurant on Happy Days, one of the people he hung out there with was Ralph Mouth, who was played by Donny Most, who is represented by the Odds and Ends hobby shop across the street from the library. So Ron Howard is represented by the library, and Donny Most is represented by the fact that the Odds and Ends hobby shop sold Dungeons and Dragons books. And both actors can be connected to books, in that the connection of Dungeons and Dragons to Odds and Ends is that they sold Dungeons and Dragons books. And the library, of course, is filled with books. And so two of the co-stars from Happy Days, Donny Most and Ron Howard, can be connected by books. Actor Jack Dodson appeared in two TV series starring Ron Howard. In the Ron Howard TV series, The Andy Griffith Show, Dodson played a character named Howard Sprague. In the Ron Howard TV show Happy Days, Dodson played the father of Ralph Mouth, the character played by Donny Most. On Happy Days, Dodson's came Mickey Mouth, and he was an eye doctor. So on one Ron Howard TV series, Dodson played Howard Sprague. On the other TV series, he played an eye doctor who was the father of Donny Most. So first I'm going to examine the connection of Dodson's character to the character of Donny Most, and that they were father and son. To do this, I'm going to be referencing three buildings from the map. The Odds and Ends hobby shop. Across the street from that is the Harriman Library. And less than a block from the Harriman Library is the old Rome Medical Center building. So these will be the three buildings. All right, number one, the Odds and Ends shop used to sell Dungeons and Dragons books. Dungeons and Dragons was a Saturday morning cartoon in which Donny Most provided the voice of the Cavalier. Therefore, Odds and Ends shop equals Donny Most. Okay, number two, the Harriman Library. As I've already explained, the brown beaver in the glass case inside the library represents the Beaver Brown Band, who had a hit song called On the Dark Side, and how this song title relates to the Obi-Wan Kenobi phone book ad for the tattoo shop across the street, or diagonally across the street. And And so this references Darth Vader, and that Darth Vader is the one who went on the dark side, and Darth Vader is the one who killed Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, in the movie The Empire Strikes Back, there's a scene in which Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker are having a lightsaber fight, and in the scene, Darth Vader makes reference to the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he also makes reference to the power of the Force. But what's really important in this scene is that he says to Luke Skywalker, "I am your father." And so the library represents the phrase, "I am your father." Okay, another interpretation of the beaver is connected to the fact that the beaver has been preserved through a method called taxidermy. The first four letters of taxidermy are taxi. So we get from the taxidermied beaver, the beaver and taxi. The beaver was directed by Jodie Foster. A taxi is driven by a taxi driver, and so we get from the beaver taxi, Jodie Foster, taxi driver. In the movie Taxi Driver, Jodie Foster played a character named Iris, and Iris is part of the eye, and so the brown beaver in the glass case also represents the word eye. Okay, now on to the final location, the Rome Medical Center building. The Rome Medical Center uses the initials RMC. RMC is an anagram for Mr. C. Mr. C is the name of a character from the TV show Happy Days. And so the Rome Medical Center equals TV character from Happy Days. The Rome Medical Center is where doctors work, and so Rome Medical Center references the word doctor. The final results are Donny Most, I Am Your Father, I Doctor, and Happy Days character. These can be rearranged to create the following. Donny Most, I Am Your Father. Happy Days, I Doctor character. On Happy Days, the I Doctor character is the father of Ralph Mouth, the character played by Donny Most. And so on Happy Days, Donny Most has a father who is an eye doctor character. On the Andy Griffith Show, Jack Dodson played a character named Howard Sprague. Both of these names have a connection to the Conan the Barbarian character. Conan the Barbarian and most of the short stories about Conan were written and created by a writer named Robert E. Howard. So the name Howard represents the creator of Conan. After the death of Robert E. Howard, another writer named L. Sprague DeCamp became the editor of a bunch of Conan the Barbarian paperback books. I think he did a lot of editing on the stories, so much so that a lot of fans of Robert E. Howard wanted the original versions of the stories to be reissued, which they eventually were. I think maybe there may have even been some unfinished Conan stories that Sprague may have finished. I'm not sure, but what's important is that Sprague absolutely did have a connection to Robert E. Howard in the Conan stories, and that he edited this collection of paperback books. So both the name Howard, the writer, and Sprague, the editor, can be connected to Conan. Earlier in this proof, I referenced the connection of the library to odds and ends via books, and that Donny Most was connected to the books, Dungeons and Dragons books. So by odds and ends, and of course the library had books, and the library had a connection to Ron Howard. Dungeons and Dragons books. Dungeons and Dragons is a sword and sorcery game, and the books that you would buy to play Dungeons and Dragons therefore would have been sword and sorcery books. So this connects to the Conan sword and sorcery books that Sprague edited and Robert E. Howard wrote. So Howard the writer and Sprague the editor equals Howard Sprague, the character from the Ron Howard TV show, The Andy Griffith Show. Now, behind the Harriman Library, there's a building called the American Legion Building. In the front yard of the American Legion Building, there's an Army cannon. So this connects to the word cannon. The word Canon is a homophone for the brand name Canon, which is the name of a company that makes computer printers. So Canon is an anagram for Conan. So from the Harriman Library, we get located in front of the American Legion Building. The American Legion Building equals Canon. Canon is a homophone for Canon. Canon is an anagram for Conan. So the Harriman Library can be connected to Conan. Now, as I've explained earlier, the beaver inside the library is a reference to a Mel Gibson movie, and the name Mel Gibson decodes the Love Gun. The cover art for Love Gun was painted by an artist named Ken Kelly, who also painted the cover of the Kiss album Destroyer. And so Harriman Library equals the beaver, equals Mel Gibson, equals Love Gun, equals Ken Kelly album cover, equals Destroyer. And so the Harriman Library can be connected to Destroyer. So what we get is the Harriman Library is across from the Odds and Ends shop where you used to be able to buy Dungeons and Dragons books. Dungeons and Dragons books were sword and sorcery books. The beaver inside the library represents the story Ron Howard told about the first time he tried to give an autograph. So the beaver is a reference to Ron Howard, who was at the time on a TV show called The Andy Griffith Show, which featured a character named Howard Sprague. And so we get Howard Sprague there. The beaver references Destroyer. And behind the library is the American Legion Building, and the cannon in the yard of the American Legion Building represents Cannon, which is an anagram for Conan. So what we get is Conan, Destroyer, sword and sorcery books, and Howard Sprague. So Howard was the writer, Sprague was the editor of some sword and sorcery books featuring a character named Conan. Years after these two men were involved in these stories, a Conan movie was made called Conan the Destroyer. Now, Conan the Destroyer was played by an actor named Arnold. And so this connects back to both Ron Howard and Donny Most. So we get from Ron Howard, who's connected to the library, we get the words Conan, Destroyer. And from Donny Most, who's connected to the Dungeons and Dragons books, so at Odds and Ends, we get sword and sorcery books. So Ron Howard and Donny Most are connected together by the Conan the Barbarian books and the Conan the Destroyer movie. Now, the references for each actor are not Happy Days. In the case of Donny Most, it's the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, and the case of Ron Howard, it's the Andy Griffith Show. So the two shows that are used to create a reference to the Conan properties are shows that each actor did apart from the other. But the one show that the two actors do have in common is Happy Days. And on Happy Days, the two characters played by Donny Most and Ron Howard hung out at a drive-in restaurant owned by a man named Arnold. And Arnold is the name of the actor who played Conan the Barbarian in the movie Conan the Destroyer.